On Energy Contact, personal growth is a blue-collar job. You can't just sit back and work the numbers. You got to get your hands dirty, get down in the gears and the grease. Today, we're going to look at some of the raw materials that are used in that process and what to do with them. So roll up your sleeves because we're digging into the core of it right now on Energy Contact.
I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and out. Keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and out. Keep my mind on better things. Just keep my mind on better things.
Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of seeing yourself and a new way of seeing the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. There is something about us that loves to categorize, separate, parse these things out, take out one little chunk, look at it under a microscope. But in fact, all that health and growth and self-improvement we're talking about take place when we do just the opposite. It happens when we put these things together. When we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move right ahead with that. Let's bring up our first slide. Everyone please understand that I am not a doctor, and I don't want to be one either. This show is not a medical show, it's not a medical advice show, it's not a medical talk show, it's not a medical anything show. Now I might call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer, things like that. Might call myself lots of things, so might you if you came to me. But state, federal, and local government, they call me none of these things. And it's good that you know that. There's a lot of important information on your screen right now. So please, if you will, read that with your full awareness. And when you've got it down, now would be a great time to locate a pencil and paper. Now here's why you want to do that. At the end of this show, we're going to run some credits. And on those credits, there's going to be contact information for me. Now I invite and encourage you to contact me. I'm sort of hoping something I have to tell you today will inspire you to want to do that. But in order to contact me, you're going to need that contact information. And in order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There'll be plenty of time to jot it down at the end of the show if you got your pencil and paper ready. So please look for that now. All right, everybody got that? Let's come back here. Today's show is show number 58. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thanks. Thanks and welcome. I think you'll enjoy the show. These shows are sequential. They build. So we're talking about things that we have introduced and explained on previous shows. There's some ramp-up stuff, some up-to-speed things that you will have missed out on. However, I'm doing my very best to make these shows have a lot of value on a standalone basis. So you'll enjoy the show today. But if it is one of your first times, and if what you see piques your interest, then I'll invite and encourage you to look around because there will be earlier shows airing at later time. They'll either be airing right here, re-airing on this channel, or they'll be on at different days and different times in different areas. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now we've reached the point of the show where I get my co-star on camera. Let's get Slim here on so we can introduce him. This is my buddy Slim, and Slim is here for a reason. Since we're investigating what it is that energy contacts in the physical self, we have to understand a couple of things, don't we? We have to understand something about energy, and this show is all about energy. But there's energy all over the place, and until we bring it into contact with us, it does us no good whatsoever. Slim is here to help us understand that thing that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. And energy without a body, well, it might be a number of cool things, but none of them are human. Okay, previously on Energy Contact, we have been looking at science and mysticism. We've seen how today's science is just yesterday's mysticism. Stuff that people were burned at the stake for a couple hundred years ago as witchcraft, now it's just dry scientific fact. And so, it stands to reason that stuff that is regarded as mysticism today will just be boring ho-hum grade school science in a few generations from now. Somebody will discover it, quote unquote. So, one of those mystical things that we've been looking at over the past few shows is energy flow in us. Pipelines and channels in our bodies and what flows through them. Chi and prana, words you hear like that. Now, when we were kids, we were taught about ourselves as these discrete individual chunks of mass. We were separate from one another, to be sure, but the story gets sadder than that. We were taught ourself, our body, separate from our mind, separate from our spirit, separate from our emotion, irreconcilable, never to meet, never to reconcile. It's a pity we were taught that. But on Energy Contact, we're starting to see ourselves in a different way, in the way Einstein saw us. We're starting to see ourselves as just a bunch of energy flows and energy forces, pulses and rhythms and vibrations in our body, and the energy that flows through them. Now, while all of these forces are invisible, they all manifest themselves to us in very visible ways. They metabolize into this stuff here, into our bodies. In fact, it is very difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to become a spiritual person until and unless we promote the flow of invisible energy through our physical structure. And so, we've looked at a lot of the paths across which the energy travels in order to do this. We've seen all those vertical channels, a spine, a caduceus, that's that medical symbol we were looking at, a distillation column, and something called a Sushumna Nadi, all sort of doing the same things. And then we saw horizontal structures, the base, the core, that place from where energy flows, our pelvis, and the energy that flows up from it. And we've seen acupuncture points and acupuncture meridians and reflexology points. Energy starting at one place and going to another place. How? Well, through paths and channels and pipelines. We've also seen the invisible body intellect. How the same materials in our brains that give us thought, recall, reason, intellect, all those things that we have always thought as brain things, how they are in fact in every cell of our body. They permeate every cell of our body. We build everything into that body intellect. And then the body intellect distills and refluxes and condenses and churns it around into us. We've spoken about another thing too. We've spoken about another invisible energy, a mysterious force that those old Indian mystics called Kundalini energy. Okay, so today we're continuing to look at those invisible yet very real channels through which energy flows. And we're looking at what it is that flows through the pipes, at the crimps and the stops and nodes, the things that either facilitate those flows or choke them off. What goes up must come down, and what evaporates must condense eventually. Isaac Newton told us those things, but Newton also told us about entropy that falls apart, and about energy that falls up sometime. So with all these motions going on this way and that way, sometimes things happen in ways that make it difficult for us to see or understand the connection between them all. Well, that's what our show is about today, then. Understanding all of those goings on, all those energetic going on, and what they all have to do with each other, and what they have to do with your health, your growth, your self-improvement, and realizing your full potential. We want to understand the core, from where these energies start their journey, and how they flow upwards through us, and how they change on their journey, and how they change us on their journey. So, we're looking at chakras and auras and Kundalini energy, things like that. But to understand what it is that flows through the pipes, first we need to understand the pipes themselves. And before we can even do that, that doesn't do us any good until we understand the starting point and the starting material. And that's where we're headed today. So, plenty to do. But first, we've reached the time in our show where we get to stop for a minute and take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye, like we do about this time of every show. So take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you're in a place that you can do that, because for today's virtual field trip, you get to visualize that we're getting ready to go mining for some precious metals. You've been looking through the jewelry stores and the jewelry catalogs over the past few weeks at some very pretty and very delicate gold jewelry and stuff like that. And you've looked at all the other precious metals and you decided that you want to be in touch with the earth, and so you want to get yours right from the source, right from the core. So we've contacted a mining expert and we're just running off to meeting now. We're ready to go get the goods. But as we meet him, he's not what you expected at all. You see him and he's covered in dirt. He's all greasy and grimy. And when you ask him about it, he tells you that we're getting ready to go right down into the bowels of the earth, and that in a few more minutes you'll be every bit as dirty and greasy as he is. And there you are, you're thinking about these delicate gold chains. And about that time, he picks up this big, crude, dirty rock and he says, here's what we're going hunting for today. Now, about the time he's showing you that, he's telling you about being in the midst of decaying dinosaur parts and stuff. And you interrupt him for a second and you say, excuse me, but I thought refining precious metals meant that I'd be in some sort of nice clean room with microscopes and little polishing machines and things like that. That's the way I saw it on the infomercials. And our friend answers, well, no, that happens a lot further down the line than that. Before they can do all of that delicate stuff, they have to have some crude starting material. Do you think this stuff just comes from the earth in a plastic bag all sealed and polished? No. And so you look at him and you say, you know what, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. This looks like hard and crude and terrible work. I don't want to do this. And he says, that's okay, that's fine, I understand. But remember, if you want that nice, sweet, delicate jewelry, then you or somebody has to be willing to get right down here in this dirt. All right, hold that thought. Let's go right from our field trip to a story from Indian mythology. We're going to look at a parable. Once upon a time, there was this woman named Shakti. And Shakti had a boyfriend named Shiva, and she wanted to see him. She wanted to be reunited with him very badly. But she was very, very far away from him. Now, we won't go into why they were separated in the first place, but for our story, we want to know that they really belong together. It's also important to know that Shiva, for reasons we won't explain today, isn't moving. And so Shakti understands that if she's going to see him, if she's going to be reunited with him, it's up to her. All right, so in order to do that, she has to launch herself off on a journey. And in order to complete the journey, she has to figure out how to get past obstacles. Shakti's trip, it's a little bit like a video game, like the PS2 games and stuff like that. In order to arrive at her destination, she has to go through a series of perils and tests. And when she completes one level, when she does well at one level, well, her reward for getting through that is to move up to a more difficult level, a more challenging one. So that's what we're looking at today, Shakti's journey. And while today is the first time that I've presented it to you in quite this manner, we've really been looking at Shakti's journey for a bunch of shows now. All right, so what does this journey have to do with Shakti? Or what does Shakti's journey, have to do with energy pipelines in our body? Well, plenty. We're seeing that energy goes on a journey in us. It rises like steam in us, and it refines itself on the way up. Let's go right to a slide. This subject brings us to distillation. And this picture on your screen shows you what moonshine and gasoline have in common, and a lot of other things too. This is a diagram and a picture of a distillation apparatus. It's the same thing side by side. Or to use the common term, a still. If you were to ever happen by a moonshine still, or if you ever pass by one of those huge oil refineries, what you see is basically an elaborate version of this little apparatus right here. So here's how it works. We start with raw material, crude ore, dirty stuff, like the stuff our miner was looking for. That's the liquid that's in that little pot over the flame there. But there's good stuff in it too. And when we heat it, it turns to steam, which rises up that column. That column, that vertical thing over the pot, that's called a fractionating column. Now remember, there's no difference between the liquid and the steam. It's the same thing in different form. It's just like mass and energy. But as the steam rises up that column, the good stuff separates from the lousy stuff, and it refines. Now this is not how precious metals are refined from ore, by the way, so I'm mixing my metaphors a little bit today on energy contact. I feel like I ought to mention that in the spirit of full disclosure, but the metal ore refining process is conceptually very close to this distilling process. Now thousands of manufactured goods we use every day are either made or processed using variations of this very simple distillation concept using machinery very similar to what you see on the machine right now. Now since we're telling parables today, you want to know that that fractionating column is homologous to the spine, and that little boiling pot underneath it is like a pelvis. Let's go right to our next slide and we'll see that a little more close up. We are refining and processing energy up the columns, up the spine there you see on one side of your screen, and up those fractionating columns. But all the material starts out in that pot. All of the good stuff, all of the bad stuff, everything. That pelvis on your screen, that is a pot of crude material too. Now what's in those pots might be crude and dirty and unrefined. But if we're put off by that, where's all the good stuff going to come from? All right, let's come back up here. Another thing we talk about on energy contact a lot is our physical structure. All the energy stuff and the chakra stuff makes no sense to us all if we don't bring it back into contact with something. Well, we're going to get my buddy Slim to help us understand what it is that energy contacts. Since our very first episodes of Energy Contacts, we've been talking about our main vertical and our main horizontal structures. You can tell from my buddy Slim here, he, like you and I, is basically a vertical creature. But that makes the horizontal stuff even more important because it has to support all of this vertical stuff. Slim's main horizontal structures are his feet and his pelvis and his shoulders. And his main vertical structures are his legs and his spine. But in the terms of physiology and in the terms of Kundalini energy, by far the most important structures of those are the main horizontal structure, the pelvis that you can see right down here, and the main vertical structure. I'll spin Slim around a little bit so you can see that spine right down there. Okay, so that's what we're understanding, and that's what we're understanding to be a lot like a distillation pot. We're going to take a look at that a little closer up. Get my spine and pelvis here. In the case of precious metals and diamonds in the rough and things like that, the process is a little different, but it's still basically getting stuff from down here up here. It's the stuff that was in those boiling pots that you just saw on your screen, and it's the stuff that's in the pelvis. So everything worthwhile in us comes from dirty sources. If we find the crude stuff too distasteful, we never get to the good stuff. Physiologically, I'll put down my spine here for a second or two, we'll pick it up in a second. Physiologically, we are very familiar with all this. We do this every day. We take raw ore, crude energy, into us every day. We need to, in fact, every moment. But it's useless the way it enters us. We have to transmute it into something we can use. You're thinking, what are you talking about? Well, it's very simple. Every moment we take raw air into our lungs, and it's useless. We have to convert it into oxygen. But even then, it doesn't stop there. Somehow, we have to take that purified oxygen that's in our lungs and transmute that into something that our blood can carry. But wait a minute, blood. How do you think that got there? Do you think it just appeared by magic? It just showed up? No, it got there because we took raw food, broccoli and potatoes and stuff like that, and we converted it into our anatomy. This stuff here, it's last week's dinner. All the bones and bloods and nerves and stuff. What else do you think it is? How else do you think it got there? So all day long we're converting mass into energy and energy into mass and mass into other kinds of energy. And the energy that we converted from mass, we converted back into other kinds. It's going on every moment. That conversion process, it's like refining, it's like distilling. And we're seeing that there's a lot of other things going on that are a lot like refining. And there's a lot of things that ancient wise people knew about before anybody knew anything about distilling and refining that's going on in us too. All right, so let's go take a look at one of those. Let's bring our next slide up on the film. We've seen that the fractionating column is homologous to the spine. There's our three friends again there. And you see those vertical columns have those little sections that the steam has to rise through. Now those little sections are just like vertebrae. Can you see how they even look like the vertebra there? Well, that's the vertical part. How about the horizontal? Well, on energy contact, we refer to our pelvis as our bowl of guts and goo. And we have seen that it is the core of us. You see those distillation pots there and that spine and pelvis. But what's that other thing? That thing there on the right side of your screen? Well, if you've been watching, you know that that is something called the Sushumna Nadi. Now really, the Sushumna Nadi is just that skinny little white pole in the middle of it. And those big circles on it, those are things called chakras. Now if your Sushumna Nadi is open, Kundalini energy will take that crude ore in your pelvis and it will circulate, distill, and refine it upwards in you. All right, let's come back up here. But Kundalini energy does not flow through most people's Sushumna Nadis. If it started to, those circle things that you saw on your screen, they would crimp it off, they'd pinch it off. But most people don't even get that far, because to get that far, you would have to have some raw material to work with. So, we're looking for the raw ore, aren't we? We're looking for the starting material. Let's think about that for a second. Every single person born starts out with some of what we will call, for right now, Kundalini energy potential. It is very crude and very dirty, and it's very, very powerful. And it's locked down in the bottom of your core, it's down there in your pelvis, and in its crude form, it is absolutely useless. Unfortunately, in about 99.99999% of us, believe me, there's a lot more nines than that, that's exactly the way it remains, from cradle to grave. Maybe across many lifetimes if you believe that sort of thing. So what we're trying to figure out is how to be in that 0.0000001%. Now that brings to mind the expression, many are called, but few are chosen. You know, I'm not sure how many are called really, but it's not everybody. And of those who are called, very few people figure out the puzzle. So if you and I are going to figure it out, we have to be willing to do something that a lot of other people either cannot or will not do. We have to overcome all sorts of blocks and knots and obstacles, like Shakti, to get that energy all the way from down here to up here. So, how are we going to do that? In a few more shows, we'll be talking in detail about chakras and stuff. That's the stuff that everybody's so interested in learning about. But the chakras only represent a part of the journey. It doesn't mean anything until we get it out here. The chakras have to do with the refining process. But before we can do any refining, we have to start with crude ore. We have to get something to refine. We have to dig it out of the bottom of the earth. All right, let's pause and reset here. What does all this have to do with Shakti? Well, I mentioned that her journey is a parable. So Shakti represents Kundalini energy, and she's down here. In fact, the name for Kundalini energy is more accurately called Kundalini Shakti. And Shakti's journey to find her lover Shiva, it's analogous to getting Kundalini energy from down here, from the bottom of the pelvis down here to the top of the head. But forget about up here now. My little spine model doesn't have a top of the head, so it's way up here. Forget about up here, because the vertical journey is useless to us at this point. Shakti is stuck down here. She's down in our horizontal structure. And before we can even get into the game, we have to figure out our core and what we have to do to pry Shakti out of here. Put my pelvis back down for a second, because the parable also tells us something else about Shakti. there's a big knot right in the top of that pelvis that has to be undone before she can get out of there, before she can even begin. So that bowl, that pelvic bowl, is a cage for poor Shakti. And by the way, if your imagery of Shakti is this beautiful, pristine, lovely Indian princess, well, think again. She is just dirty and grimy and messy, just like the miner that we saw early in our show. So, the story about Shakti and Shiva is a story about union and unity. Now remember, we're looking at yoga here, not the exercise class, but the spiritual pursuit, the spiritual journey. Now, as long as Shakti is stuck down there at the root, at the bottom of the distillation bowl, she is trapped by the false perception of separation. In this place, it is as though there is a difference between the body and the mind and the spirit and the emotion. It's like there's a difference between mass and energy. Shakti knows better than that, but her senses are deceiving her. And so you start to see the parable. Shakti's journey is not a geographical one at all. It's a journey of refining, of purifying. It's a continual series of steaming ups and dripping downs and steaming backs ups again that's homologous to the refining process, which in itself is a homologue for the way Kundalini energy wants to come up the Sushumna Nadi, which in itself is a homologue for understanding the key to perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. So, body, mind, spirit, emotion, and intellect, ego are all the same. Ancient mystics were trying to tell us that 8,000 years ago. We weren't listening then. Buying into the fact that Shakti and Shiva are separate entities at all signs us up for a very false view of a reductionist, separatist, dualist universe. And it makes you susceptible to believing what they taught you back in grade school, that you're a body separate from a mind, separate from a spirit, and separate from emotion. What a false and miserable cage that is to find yourself trapped in. And it sets you up to resist flow, which causes pain. But we're moving on to better things than that. When Shakti gets out and she goes through her series of obstacles, she moves right up to the top, and that's where Shiva's hanging out. When Shakti completes that journey, we know better than to accept all that separation nonsense, and we transcend and make energy contact. Thanks. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in energy contact.
I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping